Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming in for the second day of the UNC Clean Tech Summit. My name is Mark Laabs. I am an alumnus of the University of North Carolina and kind of Duke, which means I'm confused about what to do this weekend. My day job these days is to run a firm called Modern Energy. We invest in usually development platforms bringing new clean energy asset classes to scale, everything from energy efficiency in the United States to solar in Brazil. I'm fortunate today to get to MC and introduce a whole bunch of fantastic speakers. And before I get into that, I wanted to thank a couple folks. One is to thank all the different supporters you're seeing on the screen here. They have played a huge part in making today's event possible, and especially for enabling students to attend at reduced costs so that we can build a next generation of climate energy leaders. I want to specifically thank Strata for their platinum level support of today's event. I also wanted to say that in addition to all the things you can find sort of in the central meeting area here, there is some, we'll call it electrification of transportation show and tell going on in the parking lot. So be sure to check that out if you get a minute at some point. Without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our first keynote today. Her name is Dagmara Koska. She's the Deputy Head of Global Issues and Innovation at the EU Delegation to the US, and she's here to discuss some new elements of discuss the latest on the EU Green New Deal, which has obviously been in the news and under active sort of deliberation and discussion of late. So without further ado, Dagmara, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. I'm Dagmara Koska. I'm Deputy Head of Global Issues and Innovation Section at the EU Delegation. EU Delegation is the EU Embassy to the United States of America, and I've been in my position for 3.5 years. I've seen some developments over the past 3.5 years. My honor is to be the first keynote speech of your second day of the conference. Unfortunately, I missed the first day of the conference, but I would like to keep you animated, and therefore I think the first question is actually directed to you from me. How did you find the conference yesterday? Raise your hand if you found the first day of the conference very interesting. Yay, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I think the second question that I'd like to ask to you, my dear audience, is have you ever heard, raise your hand if you've heard of the European Green Deal? Yes, wonderful, wonderful. So my challenge is, of course, to have this audience, well-informed audience in front of me and to still make it interesting for you. So let me see if I can meet those expectations. Well, so what is the European Green Deal, and also how this relates to what you are learning and hearing during the 2 days conference that you are attending now, and also how to square what the European Green Deal is and will be with what's happening on Europe's eastern borders. War in Ukraine is ravaging millions of livelihoods and killing thousands. So I hope to be able to answer these questions today. Politico called the European Green Deal the most consequential legislative effort in the history of the European Union. The name evokes clearly comparisons to the New Deal for a depression-struck United States in 1932, proposed by then presidential candidate Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's credited for novel and all-encompassing approach, and indeed, I think it's been an inspiration indeed for the European Green Deal. The European Green Deal strategy is actually a very concise policy document. It's been issued by the European Commission. The European Commission is the European Union's executive. And it's 2.5 years old now, but a lot has happened in those 2.5 years, and I'm going to be speaking to this. It was inspired also by a growing sentiment in Europe, in particular among the youth, that Europe, the European Union, needs to act, needs to up the game on the domestic side when it comes to climate action, but also when it comes to international negotiations and achievement of our shared objectives to limit greenhouse gases emissions and keep our planet livable, actually, for future generations, of course. So the slim size of like around 19 pages, I think, conceals a big punch. The European Green Deal is the modern growth strategy. Your EU officials, like me, repeatedly say. I will try to explain to you today what that means in practice. Well, first, let me focus on how the European Green Deal fits into the overall priorities of the European Union. Well, it's the number one priority of the European Union for the period of 5 years, starting from 2019, end of 2019, December, as you've learned, and going until November 2024. Number one priority is a tall task. It means that everything the European Union does needs to meet that challenge of fitting into the overall frame that the European Green Deal provides. So it is an ambitious project, but we think that it's actually also a realistic project that reforms the way Europeans consume energy and use energy, but this is not only about final consumers, it's about also our industry and businesses. But it's also not only about energy, it's about modern mobility, it's about respect for nature and biodiversity. It's about providing Europeans with cleaner and clean water. It's about sustainability in agricultural production. Some of the presentations in the back room of this conference room are about sustainable food, I've just learned. And this translates directly into health and well-being of the Europeans. And it's about finding new ways to produce industrial goods in more circular and sustainable ways. Today, the European Commission unveiled another package of rules that are going into this direction. So it's about the future of Europe, indeed. And also, it's about covering every aspect of society and economy by this ambition of making our planet livable for future generations. On top of that, it's not only about Europe, how Europe deals with itself domestically. It's also about providing a competitive edge to our innovators, to our companies, to our businesses. It's about global leadership in technology and innovation. And it's about also leading the way for others, for other developing world in particular, that really need to learn from the example that Europe hopefully is setting on the global stage. Europe is around 8% of greenhouse gases emissions, and our emissions are in fact very fast reducing. So, however, we punch above our weight. We have been instrumental for the Paris Climate Accord, and we are the largest donor of climate finance to the developing world and of development assistance writ large. The guiding objective of the European Green Deal is to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. That means that the second largest economy in the world will stop adding carbon to the Earth's stock by 2050. But it's not only about those pledges and targets, it's actually about providing a framework, an implementation framework for those pledges and objectives. So the European Green Deal has inspired a legislative storm, you can say, of regulation and rules that we think will actually facilitate our way to reach our objectives. The centerpiece is the European climate law. Yes, you heard it right. We have a European climate law, a law that enshrines our 2050 and our 2030 objective into law, which is binding for all EU 27 member states and also EU institutions. We have to all abide by those commitments. It enshrines also the goal of 2030, which I mentioned, which is to reduce our greenhouse gases by 55% by 2030. By the end of this decade, we have another 8 years to go. It's not a lot of time. So given this obligation, we've revisited also the regulations and proposed new rules to meet those objectives. I will mention a few. For example, the emissions trading system, the EU ETS, is being also revisited and refurnished. New strategies for agriculture, hydrogen, an important topic for this conference. Building renovation, Mark, is indeed challenging here on that front. Offshore wind energy, methane pollution, sustainable investment, the circular economy, plastic pollution, sustainable transportation, and more. Last year alone, the European Union has proposed a large package of legislative documents called the Fit for 55 package. 13 legislative acts have been proposed, and we didn't add there. There was another package proposed later that year in December, the hydrogen and gas market decarbonization package. Additional legislation was unveiled last week. Proposals are made today on sustainable products design, and also additional proposals in energy on the way we manage our electricity system in the times of crisis like that in Europe, and I will speak to this in a moment, is going to be unveiled in May. But it's not only about regulations and rules. In fact, it's about stimulating investments. So especially now that the global economy is going through a crunch time after COVID pandemic, and now, of course, also the situation is quite grave in view of what's happening in Ukraine. But so we are putting our money where our mouth is, as simple as that. We have a 7-year budget in the European Union. It's a multi-annual budget that has a firepower of over 1 trillion euro. And 1/3 of that budget will go to climate objectives, is reserved for climate. On top of that, we have also a pandemic recovery facility, Next Generation EU, which again has a firepower of around 800 million, and that's already in dollars, US dollars. And over 30%, 37% in fact, is dedicated to climate objectives and EU Green Deal. And we are already delivering on these objectives. These are money that are going to be spent over the next 5 years, and 700 million indeed is of euros, and 800 million of dollars is dedicated to European Green Deal. Translating euros to dollars, but I'm sure that you all know that it's almost like 1-to-1, but not 100% so. So what's the idea behind, in fact, the investments that need to go to fulfill those European Green Deal objectives? Well, the idea is quite simple. We want to seize the moment of this unprecedented economic and social disruption that we are seeing, and reorient those investments toward sustainability. The idea reflects the growing sentiment, and also the growing sentiment in this room and elsewhere in meeting places across America and across the globe, that green investments have high fiscal multiplier effect. They can achieve in one swoop 3 objectives, the so-called triple dividend: promote economic growth, foster job creation, and reduce at the same time greenhouse gases. But the investment needs, we've calculated, are much higher than the money that we've set aside from the public budget. At least 18 billion of investments are needed in Europe every year in order to bring us to the objectives I set out for 2030. So that's about half of percentage of EU GDP yearly. That's really a big number. So obviously the private sector needs to lead the way. And with the public funds, we want to obviously de-risk some of those investments. We want to facilitate those investments. We want to also, with the regulations, set the scene for legal certainty for investors to be able to innovate and invest. Beyond rules and investments, the European Green Deal is also about providing tangible support to people that are already going through the transition in Europe. We see it vividly every day. And there are regions and communities in Europe still highly dependent on coal. And there are also regions and communities in Europe that are living in so-called carbon-intensive regions. And those need to be supported. We believe that we need to support these regions in order to reskill, upskill, and also to be able to find new opportunities in the new economy. So for us, it is about a just transition, or there will be no transition at all. So it's impossible in the half hour I've been given today to speak about all these aspects that I mentioned, transport and agriculture and so on and so forth. So, and I do want to take a few questions from you, dear audience. So let me focus on two aspects more specifically. One is Ukraine and how the European Green Deal is impacting those objectives that I mentioned. And secondly, I'd like to speak to about hydrogen very briefly, because that's going to be setting the scene also for my next distinguished speaker, Frank, who is going to be the second keynote speaker of today. So the war in Ukraine for us only underscores the resolve for us to accelerate, and the urgency to accelerate this green transition is tremendous in Europe. Europe is not as endowed with natural resources, in particular with natural gas and oil to fire our economy. And 60% of energy was imported last year by the European Union. So a transition to domestically produced renewable energy is for us not only a fight with climate change, it is for us also an opportunity to limit our dependence, our import dependence, and also to, of course, make us more energy secure. Energy prices in Europe have risen much more than in the United States over the last year. There was, in fact, a response to tightening of the global gas market, of course, the recovery post-pandemic, but we have also seen that Russia has been tightening the tap on Europe. So for us, and over the last months, of course, the armed conflict has become more and more real, and the prices have been skyrocketing. We're paying at least 200% more on the wholesale level for natural gas and electricity. On the retail level, this is a little bit dampened because there already have been some responses by EU member states governments to the increasing electricity and natural gas prices. So that has dampened the effect on consumers, but still the effect on consumers is really very staggering. European Union leaders and institutions have responded to this challenge. And I've mentioned already something that we did, a toolbox to address the high energy prices that was already done in October. And we continue using this as a guiding principle for us. Again, all needs to be in full compliance with the European Green Deal. And in March, we have mapped out also our strategy, our plan to limit our dependence on Russia. So by 2027, we want to be completely independent of fossil fuel imports from Russia. We still import not only natural gas and oil, but also coal. And some EU member states have, for example, Poland decided already to ban imports of coal from Russia. And by the end of this year, we even plan to already start very strongly shrinking the imports of natural gas by 2/3. We've imported last year 155 BCM of natural gas from Russia, and 2/3 is around 100 BCM. So by the end of this year, we hope to be limiting this dependence on Russia very, very strongly. And in that context, I'd like to mention something that you might have read in the press last week. President Biden was, in fact, in Brussels, also in Warsaw. But what we've unveiled last Friday is really unprecedented. The EU and US have come up with a plan to help Europe diversify natural gas imports. So by the end of this year, the US will help Europe get at least 15 BCM of natural gas on top of what the US has been importing to Europe by the end of this year again. And then by the end of the decade, we hope to be getting additional 50 BCM of natural gas imports from the United States. That's really an important number because the United States is, as committed to those long-term objectives, mid and long-term objectives. And therefore, in particular, when it comes to natural gas production, the United States, as the European Union, want to limit the methane emissions, which, as you know, methane is a very potent gas. And in short term, the gains that can be obtained from limiting methane emissions are really very important for the overall pace of our global warming. So not only will we jointly work on those diversified supplies, we will also make sure that the gas that we get is cleaner, that its emissions decrease over time. And on top of that, which this statement contains, is a joint effort to work on acceleration of green energy, clean energy, but also to work on the demand side, on moderation of demand overall, which is really a big achievement for those who know how difficult it is, in fact, to pursue energy efficiency policies, how difficult it is to convince of the effects and positive effects of energy efficiency policies. This is a big gain. And very quickly on hydrogen. Well, on hydrogen, for us, the priority is renewable hydrogen. So we have targets 6 gigawatt of electrolyzers in renewable electrolyzers by 2025, and then 40 gigawatt by 2030. It's a big gap that we need to fill there. And what we are trying to do is not only stimulate research and innovation to bring down the costs and create synergies, but also I think it's important to create already now, think ahead and create dedicated infrastructure and market for hydrogen in Europe, but also in our neighboring states, neighboring countries that can import, can become hydrogen hubs for the European Union. So leveling this playing field for hydrogen is really of utmost importance right now. It will facilitate access for renewable hydrogen to the existing gas network, and it will also foster this holistic, comprehensive network planning that we need for hydrogen. On the global stage, we need standard setting. It's important to know, if we're comparing apple with pears, or apple and oranges, as the Americans say. So we need to know that standards are really reliable when it comes to this additionality. Is this green hydrogen, in fact, providing those emission reduction gains that we so strive for? And on top of that, in this package of documents that we've unveiled in order to address the dependence that Europe has on Russian fossil fuels, we've unveiled a hydrogen accelerator. This will allow us to make available another 20 million of tons of renewable hydrogen that will replace up to 50 BCM of Russian gas. So I would like to conclude here and say that the European Green Deal is not only the most consequential, but also the most comprehensive legislative efforts in the history of the European Union. And over the last 2 years, we've been battle tested, indeed, with the pandemic, but also with right now with the war in Ukraine. And what clearly that requires is all hands on deck. And so we have the political resolve, we have a plan, we have the economic opportunity. Now we have to succeed. So please wish us success. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to take questions. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about your hydrogen accelerator? Are you doing that through subsidies, tax credits?
Yes, it's going to be to some extent, of course, done with tax credits. You call it tax credits in the EU. In the US, we call it subsidies, of course. So yes, we will provide a framework that will be for member states, for our EU member states, to support hydrogen production in Europe. Anybody else? Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about your approach to achieving a resilient net zero? You know, essentially getting to net zero with a resilient world. What the strategy potentially around that?
So are you referring to the net zero world that
essentially achieving the emissions reduction, but getting there in a way that also addresses adaptation.
Yeah.
Like around infrastructure.
Yeah.
You know, deal with
yes. Absolutely. So indeed, this is a very, very valid point and an excellent question. So it is not only about mitigating those effects of climate change in a sense of reducing emissions, but also about adaptation and adapting and building resilience. And so for us, these are two strands of work that really work very closely together. At the same time, we have a dedicated strategy for the European Union that deals with our adaptation needs. It's in fact the second edition of our adaptation strategy. This strategy will, for example, foresee that we will stress test all our infrastructure in Europe when it comes to impacts of climate change. And it's relevant because that's really where there is granularity in experience. So our EU member states have a lot of firsthand experience, like the Netherlands and others, to deal with, for example, rising water levels. And in fact, this is one of the topics for a very intense discussion that I was leading with Frank. We were partnering to organize a EU-US exchange on this with US states under the US Climate Alliance to discuss resilience and infrastructure. In infrastructure, water infrastructure, but overall, green banks, how can you finance resilience? How can you finance more adaptation? I think by now, we see data emerging that clearly tells us, I mean, the costs of doing nothing are just enormous. So it's much cheaper to actually already plan ahead and strengthen our resilience right now. Every year, we see so many devastating effects of extreme weather. We see wildfires that start much earlier. We see much stronger storms. We see droughts. There is effect on agriculture sector. There is an effect on forestry sector. As you know, forest is a carbon sink, very important to deal with emission reductions also through sinks. So if, for example, those effects of climate change are in fact growing stronger, we also need to grow stronger response and become more resilient. You see that also in President Biden's budget. He unveiled it yesterday, and there's a lot about strengthening the way that the United States, for example, and the agencies of the government will be able to deal with those effects of climate change on the ground, already experienced by Americans. Again, Europeans are not in a different boat here.
So thank you very much, Dr. Koska, for your lecture, for your work, and for your grades, which is fantastic. So my question is about dependence on Russian gas. So you just say that by the end of this year, Europe is going to reduce its dependence on Russian gas by 2/3.
Yeah.
And you say that by 2027, this dependence will be over. So my question is, why not earlier, and how? And also connected to this question, how does the EU harmonize the need for investment in military expenses, so with the need to invest in sustainable and renewable energy?
Yeah, sure. This reliance that we have on Russia is much stronger than reliance on of the United States or any other global, let's say, player. We are obviously the closest neighbors with Russia. Our energy systems have been interlinked for decades. That goes back to the times of the Cold War. It's over 5 decades that we've been having pipelines and so on and so forth with Russia. So far, Russia has been a relatively reliable supplier to, in particular, mostly the western part. The eastern part of Europe has slightly different experience when it comes to Russia. We've had some supply crises in 2006, 2009 that made us also already change our policies a lot, and I can speak to that maybe in the pause, because it's really almost like a next big conversation. So I mentioned those 155 BCMs, right? If you compare this to our diversification efforts that European Union has been pursuing after those crises of 2006 and 2009, we've opened the Southern Gas Corridor that supplies Europe with gas from Azerbaijan. That's 10 BCM. We've been working on that for a decade. The LNG market is a very promising market, but it's again also a relatively new development. We see new projects materializing every year and almost every day, new long-term contracts being signed, like yesterday, for example. But for example, to compare also, the United States has supplied Europe with 22 BCM last year. So if you see, those numbers are just incredible. 22 versus 155 BCM from Russia. It's not something you can do overnight, essentially, unless you want to freeze our society, our citizens, unless you want to completely run our businesses to the ground. So that's really the big challenge we are dealing with. And again, the way to address this challenge for us is not only to diversify suppliers, but also to directly take this as an opportunity for biogases, for renewable gases, for energy efficiency, demand response, renovate houses much more quicker. So for us, this is an opportunity indeed, but it's a tall task. We are almost 500 million people living in Europe. So the task is really, really great. Thank you. I think I've run out of almost my time. Yeah, I've actually almost hit 5 minutes more. Thank you so much. Thank you.